Welcome to Kim Talks Resilience, where we share stories of insight and inspiration in life, love, and business with resilient women from around the world. Speaking with authors, entrepreneurs, founders, and coaches to learn their strategies for a more resilient life so we can all build the life we love. I'm your host, Kim Hayden. Hello, and welcome back to Kim Talks Resilience. Super excited that you're joining us here today. Welcome back to everybody. If this is your first time here, let me give you a little insight as to what you can expect by sharing the next half hour or so with myself and my guests. Kim Talks Resilience is all about talking to women who are inspiring leadership, stepping out in front of the entire pack and saying, I'll lead the way. They're going to share stories of insight and inspiration. These are speakers, leaders, creators, entrepreneurs, and coaches. And you know what? We're going to learn the strategies that they've implemented for their successes so we can all lead the life we love. So again, I'm Kim Hayden, your host. You're in for a treat today. You're going to meet one of my heroes of 2022. This woman is crushing it. So, and I'm going to say this wrong because this is my Kansas. It does sound different. So Deirdre Tshien is the co-founder and CEO of Capsho, the world's first AI-powered podcast copywriter. Capsho is a software that helps experts who podcast create their AI-generated episode title, player description, show notes, social media captions, promo email, blog post, LinkedIn article, and YouTube description in under 10 minutes. So they can quickly amplify their message, grow their listenership, and build their movement. She's the creator of Content Honey Traps, author of Honey Traps, host of the Grow My Podcast show. And by the way, their Capsho has the best mascot. You got to go and check it out. Trust me on this. You will not be disappointed. Welcome. So
Hey.
You're going to hear an accent, folks, but she's not in Australia. I love this. Okay. We're going to literally dive right in because you're on my bucket list. Where you're from is on my bucket list. So I'm literally going to turn this over. Tell us who you are first.
Oh my gosh, what a loaded question, Kim. How does one answer this without going to years and years of therapy? Who am I? So I am a first migrant. So I feel like I'm second generation raised Aussie from Malaysia, from Southeast Asia. I am a absolute nerd, a massive nerd. I love reading. I also love exploring. I'm a Sagittarius. I wander a lot. I don't know. I'm an innately curious person. I think that's fundamentally who I am.
Well, and that's a big one these days, is being ceaselessly curious, right? Because the world's moving too fast for anybody to get set in their ways. If you get set in your ways, you'll be left behind. If you get set in your way today, what you're doing today will probably be outdated. With the way it's moving right now, like 5-6 weeks.
Yes.
But at least within a half a year, right? If you're not constantly updating and being curious as to what the options and opportunities are out there. So you're Aussie. I ever wrestled an alligator? Just saying. Come on, work with me here. I'm from Kansas. I have a limited understanding of Australia. Kangaroos, sloths. Okay. I love the sloth, by the way.
Yeah, so this is our mascot. It is a sloth. Now, not native to Australia. I wish they were, but they.
I love how you just rubbed your.
I know, The sloth became our mascot because I don't think we don't really share about this story, but the whole reason for Capsho was because apart from me being just innately curious, I am also innately lazy. And just like all good entrepreneurs, I'm like, oh my gosh, I do not want to be writing all the time. How can I be intelligently lazy about what it is that I'm doing and putting out there? And that's how Capsho came to be. And so the whole mantra of being intelligently lazy, that's kind of who we serve, the intelligently lazy expert who podcast. That's how the sloth came about, as the intelligently lazy. They know how to preserve body energy. They only fall out of the tree like once or twice a day to poop. Very efficient with their movement. And so I was like, man, we need to learn how to be like that.
How to be like, we all need to be sloths. Well, in a
Yeah.
world that's going a million miles an hour, that I think there is a mantra in there. I think actually there's a private retreat. You could actually, the sloth retreat. We could all
Yes.
pet sloths and lie around. I digress. So let's go into what you do, because it is fascinating. The world was startled this last 2 weeks. We had an AI drop that has put professors are looking at AI, at this AI now, going in 24 months at current rate of this exponential growth, this learning curve this AI is on. We're not going to be able to tell human written papers from AI written papers. So very
Yeah.
fascinating. You are in the AI space out of necessity, and yet you've created something that is, again, I think I've seen 6 or 7 evolutions of change and move and this and that, and it's constantly moving. Talk to us about first how you started this. Everybody sees a need, not very many people create a solution.
Yes. Oh gosh. Okay. So how Capture came to be is a little bit of, like all good entrepreneurship stories, a little bit of a journey. I'll start it from like a couple years ago. So that was when I had my first coaching business. It was helping e-commerce businesses grow. And that was actually when I started my first podcast. So I was told by a mentor at the time to start publishing. So I did, had no idea what I was doing. And very quickly also realized that I was like, oh my gosh, I'm spending all my time doing this thing. But it wasn't growing. It wasn't really getting leads. It wasn't like, it just didn't feel like I was getting an ROI. And, apart from being a massive nerd, I'm also very economically minded. So I was like, oh, I need to make this thing, if I'm going to put time into it, I need to get an ROI out of it. And so I really started to delve into, how do I make this thing work? And a lot of it is, I made the same mistakes that a lot of new podcasters do, which is like, oh yes, I've got this thing published. I'm so excited. It's out there. And then you just assume that it's going to grow on its own, right? And I then had a bit of a wake up call to be like, oh, I actually have to promote this thing. I have to grow it. And so I started really nerding out and doing that. And once I started doing that, my coaching business for e-commerce really grew. And I think it really came down to, that whole know, like, and trust. I read this book by Daniel Priestley called Oversubscribed, and he talks about the 7-hour rule. And I was like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense now, why podcasting is so powerful, and why a lot of my clients who came in was like, when I asked them, oh, what made you, decide to sign up? They were like, well, I've been following you and I've been listening to your podcast and I love what you have to say. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's a real thing. Like, this podcasting is just such a powerful tool to get someone to come to know, like, and trust me. And so I kind of went all in. There was 2 things happening at that one time. So that was happening. But then also on the client side, I was telling them that what they needed to do, because as e-commerce business owners, they hide a lot behind their product. So a lot of times they're like, I'm just going to post and promote my product, and I just want to hide from being the face of it. And I was like, well, actually, it doesn't quite work that way. Especially when you're just starting out, you are the only differentiator that you have. So you have to tell your stories. You have to tell your people, how this all came to be, all of that. And they were like, oh, okay, I get it, Deirdre, but I don't know how to tell my stories. So funnily enough, the first version of Capsho was something pretty different. What it did was it was designed to help my clients and these entrepreneurs tell their story. So it would prompt them through like a storytelling tool essentially, and then the software would take that and convert that into a bank of social media captions and emails. And I was like, at the time, as you can imagine, I was like, oh my God, this is like the best thing since sliced bread. This is going to change the world. And it didn't, obviously, because it didn't take off at all. And I remember like it was, a couple of months into having launched that, and I was with my coach and I'm like, what is going? And I was like, look, this is going to be a 5-minute conversation. There's something wrong with my messaging. It's all my messaging. And as you can imagine, that 5-minute conversation became like a 45-minute one, where he really just laid into me. And he was like, okay, well, who are you serving? Like, who's your audience? And I was like, well, all entrepreneurs can use this. And he was like, no, that's not good. And I was like, you don't understand. We're different. Like when you have that thing, and I was like, we are not different. But it was again, another wake up call that we needed to have. And he systematically took us through and just questioned us and was like, okay, well, who do you want to serve? Who do you want to work with? You talk about storytelling, who are, natural storytellers? Like all of those questions came to the point of like, well, I podcast. Like I'm an expert who podcasts. I love this medium. It's actually meant so much to my coaching business. Podcasting is a natural audio form of storytelling. Like these are people actually that I want to work with. So we actually completely niched down who we were targeting to experts who podcast, so coaches, consultants, service providers who podcast. And that was how this current version of Capsho came to be. Because from there, when I then sat down and thought about all the things that I had to do to promote my podcast, all of the numerous pieces of content that I had to write, and I was spending hours doing each week, I was like, oh my gosh, we can make this so much simpler and so much quicker for people, for us and for other people.
It's not even just creating all the content, it's getting it out there, right? Even just posting it, right?
Yes.
I have to ask, do you use a scheduler? What do you do? Because I know that a lot of people they get lost. They go down the whole scroll hole when they end up on social media. Walk me through then how you utilize. It's one thing to create something, it's another thing to activate it. So what are the distribution, or how do you utilize what you've created through Capsho?
Yes. Thanks for asking this. It's like my favorite topic to nerd out on. Okay. So I've kind of like distilled it into this framework that I call content dripping. And content dripping is being really intentional about the platforms that you use and how you use them as well. So the number one thing I say is that you don't want to be everywhere. So Capsho makes it, I'll be very honest to say, it makes it very easy for you to be everywhere. But if it was me, and actually even me now, like having been years into podcasting, like I'm still not everywhere, because I'm very, very, I want to be very intentional with how I decide to use a platform. So for example, you don't see me on TikTok. I'm barely even now on Instagram anymore. I'm actually transitioning off. I'm still on there a little bit, but I'm really focusing my efforts on LinkedIn and Facebook. Those are kind of the two social media platforms that I really want to kind of own from a knowing how to, build communities, really know how to use those platforms, because it's impossible for me to know how to use LinkedIn and Facebook and TikTok and Instagram and all the things deeply enough to be able to actually make it work for me. So that's kind of the number one thing that I would put out there. Now, when we go back to content dripping, there's kind of like two things to it. There's one, which is if I break down the pieces of content, I kind of break it down into what I call content honey traps, which is almost, think of it as your promotional pieces. So the reason why I call it content honey traps is because it's all about how you initially trap someone in a nice way. That's why we use honey. It's a honey trap, right? We want to nicely bring someone into our world. And then once they're in our world, then we want to delight them. We want to give and delight. And so that's almost the second part of content dripping, which is what I call building your publishing house. And we don't want to overwhelm. So it's, again, very intentional, right? We want to bring someone into our world. They come to know us, and one of those is our podcast. It might be like we're promoting our podcast, they come and listen to it, and then they're like, oh, I want to know more about what it is that you do and what value you can provide. And again, this goes back to the whole 7-hour rule that I already mentioned, because you want them to be spending 7 hours with you. But also, people consume content in a whole host of different ways, right? Like podcast is just one part, it's the audio form. But then there are a lot of, like, I love podcasts, but I also, when I want to learn something, I also really like reading. Like, I like looking at blog posts or articles and newsletters. I can kind of scan and be like, oh, okay, I've got it. Either it's interesting and I'm like, I want to go back and read it in more detail, or actually that's not quite the thing that I was looking for, so I'm going to find the next thing. So that's where blogging comes in, is really important. But we also know that video is becoming a big way to consume information. And so, getting your video, like your YouTube videos out there, becomes really important. So this is how I think about it. If I go back to the content dripping framework, I go, all right, I want to ideally start someone on my podcast because that's my primary piece of content. I then want them to come into my world, and I want them to learn from me in different ways. Now, I use YouTube because if you think about, so there's YouTube and there's Google, effectively, right? Like blog and video content. Now, I want people, when people use Google, they're kind of almost going, well, I want to answer a question. I want an answer to a question that I have, right? That's so when I think about what I'm blogging about, I still stem it from my podcast content, but I'm way more intentional about asking, like, oh, why is this thing even important? Why is this thing that I'm talking about even important, right? That's like the question that I'm kind of helping answer for you. And so I actually released my blog post 2 weeks after my initial podcast episode, because the great thing about that too is that if someone's come listen to your podcast episode, we all need repetition. That's how we learn. And so that's why I also want them to listen to my podcast episode. So I'm not going to give them anything. I'm not going to give them all the things yet. I want them to listen to that, take what they can from it, and then hit them up a couple of weeks later to be like, hey, remember how I spoke about that topic? Here's even more in a different form that you can continue learning from. With my YouTube, the question, what YouTube is usually used for is like a how. How do I do something, right? That's what we want to watch. We want to watch the ins and outs of the thing that we want. So what I do is I take my podcast content, and generally, even when I have a guest on, it's very much about, 3 steps, 3 things, what is it that we can learn. I actually pull one of the steps out and I actually go even deeper into it if it's like my step, or I do it if it's a guest. So I'll actually do it and I'll show, and I'll be like, this is how I've taken what I learned from this guest. And I'm going to show you how I did it. And that's actually what I put on YouTube. So I have a little bit of a different approach, but that's my content dripping framework. It's how do you drip this long form content and then have the short form social media content support that through the content honey traps, and through, constant engagement and education after they go live. Did that make sense?
That makes absolute sense, because because I tend to drop the entire cache at the same time, right? And just because I'm moving between a couple different platforms and such, and tracking, I'm not I'm the sloth, man. I'm not I am. And I'm so ADHD that if I don't have it, so I just use right now the best tracking tool I've found is just creating my own through Trello. So I can see all the buckets. Where is each person, right?
Yes.
And there's so many moving parts. And podcasting, I'm seeing people like corporations are replacing their newsletters with an internal podcast, because that way you feel more connected with the people who are actually creating the decisions within your company, making those changes or shifts. Because a lot of times people resist, well, not a lot of times, all people resist change. right?
Yes.
They do. They resist change. And when you're the corporate leader says I know we've done it this way for 5 years, but we're going to change this, da 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 da, and that trickles down, and you just get an email memo. You're going, okay, I get 140 emails a day, and most
Yes.
of it is somebody trying to sell me something. And you know what? I'm so over email. I'm so over email. Unless you've got something really valuable that I really need, don't send me an email. And I think a lot of employees, they view the weekly company email almost as like getting your utility bill. It's like, oh crap, right? Whereas if you with the podcast, if you structure it right, and it's all about you run a show. If you know you run a show, you have to have a run a show. It can't just be random verbal diarrhea out there. You have to have some sort of start, middle, and end to a
Yes.
podcast. But I think that, it's such a great medium. It's so intimate. It's
Mm-hmm.
so personal.
Yes.
Um, and I think with the development of AI, that at the end of the day, the only thing we're going to have that is a financial differentiator is if people connect with you.
Yes.
And
100%.
that is, and it's just crazy what's going on out there. Um, let's talk a little bit about stats. I love my stats. So let's talk about uh, average. I read that the fall off rate for new podcasts is 7 episodes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Um, what is it? Less than 1% of podcasts globally get to 100 episodes, and that revenue creation tends to mirror like a 24-month timeline, 100 episode or more. That's showing that you have longevity, that you have sustainability within a podcast. Let's talk a little bit about, because there's all this crap going around. Oh, I'll start a podcast and make $1 million. Joe Rogan. Well, sorry, Joe Rogan is first and foremost. He was first. He's there. Spotify's giving him all the money. So let's talk a little bit what would be the advice to somebody I'm going to build you an avatar. She
Okay.
is 42 years old, has come through the pandemic, decided that she's not going to go back to corporate America, tried it, hated it, and she has started a consulting business on her zone of genius.
Mm-hmm.
She is going to layer a podcast into it because podcasting can be the front point of
Yes.
people getting to know you.
Yes.
What would be the advice for her, knowing that we have a 7 episode, because we've got tech, time, talent, traction, tools, all the T's in there that can
Yes.
truly tank somebody's efforts.
Yes.
So let's talk about that. What are the first few things that you would tell her to get ready for or to put in place?
Okay. The very first thing, and this is going to sound so cliched, so I hate myself for saying this, but it's like, it is the most important, because everyone says this, by the way. So is you've got to know exactly who you're speaking to. Like, I don't know, there's so many different ways that like your avatar, your ideal client, like, but I can tell you, and I was actually talking to an SEO expert. I was actually interviewing him yesterday, and it's so fascinating to see how it all comes together, even from a Google. Like, you think about Google's run by machines essentially, and so the way that even from an SEO machine perspective, how they start to bucket you, like, so this 42-year-old avatar, let's give her a name, Tracy. So Tracy is like the way that even Google is going to bucket Tracy is going to be so dependent on who it is that she targets and what she talks about. So even when I put out to this SEO expert, I actually asked him, I was like, okay, well, I have a user of Capsho. He's broadly in the personal development space, but he talks about under personal, because it's so broad, right? But under personal development, it's like fitness, finance, family, faith, like everything, right? That you could potentially talk about. How would Google view that? And it's like, it can't put you into a bucket. And so what's really fascinating, and so even when you think about it technically, so you think about it from a human level, which is like, if Tracy didn't know who she was talking to and what exactly she was talking about, like very, very niche, then she's going to get lost, even for like me listening to her to try to figure out what it is that she does, right? To be like, am I in your, like, are you trying to talk to me? Am I the right person, or should I be thinking about someone else? And what is it that you actually do? Like, what, if I don't know that as a human, like the machines have no idea. So even if you're trying to rank for SEO, even if you're trying to rank on any podcast players, things like that, like you're just gonna get no hope. So that's why it's like, I cannot stress enough that the number one thing that you have to get nailed is who you're speaking to and what you're speaking to them about. Like, what one specific topic are you speaking to them about? That would be the first thing. And then the second thing is, everything else honestly falls off the back of that, because I could tell you all of the tactics about, how to use content dripping, and how to optimize for SEO for your blog posts, and how to optimize for SEO for your YouTube videos and things like that. But that all comes down to this one thing, which is knowing who you're talking to and what you're talking about. That is literally what everything comes out of. So if you can nail that, then being discovered actually becomes pretty easy. It gets to be pretty easy. Everything that Capsho helps you with just will naturally fall off the back of that. And that's why we've had a lot of users comment about, like, they're like, oh my gosh, Capsho isn't just helping me create the content to promote my episode really, quickly and easily. It's helping me actually refine the structure of my podcast, because if a machine cannot understand what it is that you're talking about and the message that you're trying to get across, a human won't be able to. Like, I know that we're multifaceted, and we have a lot going on in our brains. We always take shortcuts. That's just how our brains work. We just want to get to the thing. It's like, oh, okay, are you talking to me? And are you talking about the thing that I care about? Right? Like, if I can't get that, if I don't understand that, I'm off. I'm switched off. And so we're even more brutal as humans than the machines. So that's almost something that you've got to kind of understand, right? Like, is that landing with you, Kim? I don't know.
No, that's exactly.
Yeah.
I personally loved speaking with female entrepreneurs, speakers, coaches, and authors. And the authors, what's fascinating is, I want authors to be on here because authorship is a business.
Mm.
So I have to actually move their language around to the business of why they wrote the book, right?
Yes.
So because the authority kind of sphere is authorship, podcast, video, blog. Like, there's all of these things, but authorship is pretty darn critical if you want to be on a speaking circuit or anything along those lines. You have to it really do have to have it. And so, but I find that a lot of women can't see what the core of what they're doing, because they're lost within a singular message. I had a gal on the show who had a product she developed for, and what's fascinating is, women, we don't sit and bemoan stuff. We tend to go out and go, okay, this sucks. I need to figure it out. So what, we look at it. So men built the big ships, women designed the lifeboat. Men built the tall buildings, women designed the fire escape.
Yeah.
A man built the car, a woman put a heater in it. I'm serious, folks. Like,
Love it.
we see a need, we create the solution, right? This is just what we do. But I find that sometimes they get so lost within the absolute detail, micro detail of the exact one thing they've done, that they cannot create. It's hard for them to create a message that is on a broader scale that people, because the reality is I can learn from somebody who's created a body cream and gone through FDA approval. It's not what I'm doing, but I can learn how she found the solutions, who she spoke to, what was the perseverance, what was the thing she put in place, how did she get to that next level? Because it's not like you're 16 years old in high school and say, oh, I'm going to invent a hemp cream that solves all my aches and pains. There's not a course on that, right? So we have to learn, and I think that following those seeds of success, those crumbs, those pieces that are left behind, will allow each person to gain success in their niche,
Yeah.
right? Money. So let's talk real quick. Money. Everybody is, 2028, it's estimated that the podcasting world will be at $94.88 billion value. I love my stats. Sorry, guys. I
You love
am a
it.
stats
Yeah.
junkie. And I know that a lot of that is actually reappropriated revenue from other mediums like radio. So we see iHeart now, which was at one point in time, and still is one of the largest radio syndicates in North America. That now is really, really powerful. It's in the top 10 for service providers on podcasting. How do people make money though? When there's how many millions of podcasts are out there right now?
Yeah.
And how many, do you know the percentage of like how many podcasts are actually at 100 podcasts or more? Like, I'm just curious. I haven't been able to find that stat.
Yeah, I don't know. There's just like a lot of anecdotal things around. But yeah, I haven't found an exact
Okay.
stat on that either.
Okay. So how do people make money on a podcast?
Yeah, so my personal opinion on this is that you need to have your own business off the back of it. And that's why, I mean, I'm biased, obviously, because I am serving experts who podcast. So, the Tracy's, she's got her own consulting service and she wants to use a podcast as an entry point for people to find out more about her and who she is. That is the best, simplest, quickest way to actually monetize a podcast. Trying to go for sponsorship is a long game. So if you are hoping that you can quit your full-time job and just start a podcast and that's your full-time job, just getting sponsors, like, again, it's I would say it's very, very unrealistic. It's not to say it's not impossible. It's just going to take a lot of time because you have to build an audience, and building an audience, unless you're super famous, takes a long time. And so the primary way to monetize a podcast, I would say, is that you need to have a back-end offer off the back of it. So whether that is being a coach, and you lead someone onto you. My primary purpose for my podcast is and I'm always thinking about it this way, is how do I build my email list? I'm trying to get people from my podcast onto my email list. And from there, I can, depending, because my funnels change all the time because I'm constantly experimenting, right? Like, especially when I was in coaching, it's like, it might be a challenge 1 month, it might be a webinar. I'm constantly trying to experiment. So, but at least if I have them on my email list, I can always be inviting them to that thing. It's like, hey, I'm going to hold this free challenge. Come and join it. And off the back of that, I pitch, a high ticket offer, or come to my webinar. And off the back of that, I pitch something, right? But ultimately, my podcast is there. Personally, I think, to build your audience, build your list. And then from there, you monetize.
Absolutely. Okay. Let's talk resilience. So I know every entrepreneur has a moment where they're rocking in the corner going,
I have so many of those. Oh my gosh, Kim.
Can you share though one pivotal point that without resiliency you wouldn't be on, you wouldn't have Capsho, you wouldn't be where you are today?
Yeah, I think, as I said, I could share so many, from like being in landlord battles to, but by way of background, I'll share this one situation, I guess. So my husband and I actually we actually just sold our businesses in Sydney. So we have had, I have to get used to saying that now, had dessert bars and burger restaurants in Sydney that we opened close to 9 years ago. At the end of 2018, so we grew the dessert bar to 5 locations and the burger restaurant to 2. And at the end of 2018, we found out that our store manager of like our busiest store, the one that was located in the city, had been stealing from us like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I actually distinctly remember it was like we found out like late Thursday night, sort of Friday morning. I was on my way to meet a friend. Friday morning, we do yoga 7 a.m. every Friday. And I just remember like being in this absolute day because I think it hadn't really quite hit. Like some of it had, but there was also a little bit of like maybe maybe this is all wrong. Like maybe it's because you never expect someone that you trust to do something like that, and that yoga. I was falling all over the place. It was like kind of my mind was not there, but that was such a pivotal moment because honestly, that was what had us questioning everything, to be honest. Like that had us questioning whether this was actually still the thing that we wanted to do. Was this the path that we still wanted to be on? Were these the businesses that we wanted to grow? We never questioned that before because we were just on this path. It's funny, you kind of move, you get out of corporate to like get out of the hamster wheel and you just end up building your another hamster wheel for yourself. And so that's kind of where we found ourselves, right? Like we were just doing. And so that was the moment where we really had to look at ourselves and be like, oh my gosh, like, is this it? And honestly, that was the reason why we decided to move to the States, because that happened. We were like, nope, that's not what we want to do. We'll figure it all out, but we're just going to make the move and see what happens. So that was hard. It was hard because it was a betrayal. But also, if not for that, then all of the amazing things that have happened since then also wouldn't have happened. So I think, yeah, you talk about resiliency. I hate having to be in those situations at any time, but I also know that that's just part of the journey. Like we have, because we can only learn from that. So yeah.
And that is such a powerful story because there's so many layers within it. We we feel foolish when we feel like we've been fooled, and it
Mm-hmm.
has nothing to do with you or your
Yeah.
decisions. It's all on the other person. We doubt. We think. I love that story because there's so many layers to it, and money is one of those things that can really undermine your own every aspect of who you are. And it's unfortunate, but money is this piece of us that we sit here and go, uh, what did I do to deserve this? How did I let this happen? Is this truly my worth? And that's a great story to share because there's going to be a lot of people, especially with what we've come through over the last few years. There's a lot of people that are struggling financially this year that every dollar may not be hundreds of thousands of dollars. It may be, I mean, I know somebody right now that is out like $6,000 for videoing. And I
Mhm.
mean, that's a big difference that,
Yeah.
that makes, rent, and it makes everything. So
Mhm.
thank you for sharing that. That is,
You're
that's,
welcome.
and like I said, folks, it's not necessarily misery loves company, but sometimes it's nice to know that somebody else has been where we may be today. So, let's talk books real quick. What is a couple books that you believe every female entrepreneur should read?
Yes. So there's a book I mentioned Oversubscribed by Daniel Priestley. So I would highly recommend that book. There's also a book by Kindra Hall about storytelling, just because I love storytelling. So, and I love the art, but also the science behind the power of storytelling. So, yeah, if you look up Kindra Hall, and there's also a book that from a maybe more tactical. I'm not sure how to describe it, but I found it really helpful for me when I was on social media and I was trying to do all these things. But it's a book called Contagious by Jonah Berger as well. So yeah, would recommend that book too.
Very awesome, awesome, excellent, excellent. Those are good ones. Kendra Hall, excellent. real quick, let's go through. I want to go through all your socials because you are a woman we've got to be watching and
Mm.
listening into. The world's changing, folks, and if you don't change the way you do business, you will get left behind. And I believe there's a lot we can learn. So go ahead and run us through all your socials and where we can find you.
Yeah. So if you want to listen to, like if you have a podcast or if you're looking to start one and you want to know how to grow it, then definitely start with my podcast called Grow My Podcast Show. I go into a lot of the things that we are testing and experimenting with. I talk to a lot of guests who are absolute experts in their space about, how to. So, for example, when I was mentioning SEO before, that was actually from an interview. So you're going to hear from Jason Bernard about all things SEO for your podcast. So super cool. Listen to that Grow My Podcast Show. And then if you just check Capsho out because it is truly, if you're a podcaster, I don't know, Kim, what did you say? It's going to change your life. You're
It
going to change
it
the way you do
ab
things.
it absolutely so my to process a podcast for me before Capsho was anywhere between 6 and 8 hours because I am not a copywriter. I am not a writer, but I know that I need to have this article on LinkedIn. I know that I need to have it on medium.com. I have to have it on my website. I mean, Google needs to see my name and my guest name anywhere between 15 and 21 times, right? And that's through all the different distribution platforms from Facebook, LinkedIn, Medium, all of them. And I would spend, between 6 and 8 hours. I actually have my overall time per file now is down to just around 3.5 hours. So
Wow.
that's from intake because I do full intake. I have everything coordinated in with Calendly. I utilize probably about 8 different tools for every single guest.
Mm.
So just tracking and, you know, God love Google Docs because if not for Google Docs and folders and such, I would be lost. Canva. Hello, another amazing Aussie. Like, seriously, what are they feeding you guys down there? It must be something about, that what I had an Aussie once tell me that Aussies are crazy and ingenious all in the same go because there's literally 7 layers of potential death between their house and the water, open water, right? Between all the spiders that will kill you
Yeah.
and the animals that will eat you and the jellyfish that will sting you and the sharks that will chomp on you. Like they were just like, there's like 7 layers. And it's like, okay, Elf went through the candy cane forest and they had all these things. I'm like, boy, Australia must be the opposite of the North Pole. But yeah, so yeah, and Canva, I got lost there. Canva
Hmm.
crushing it. Like, and like I said, things are moving so bloody fast. So we're starting to see tools like uh all these tools are starting to kind of they're starting to lock and work with each other.
Yes.
So we're seeing like hints of AI writing and formatting in Canva. Jasper now has some really cool products around, like even just writing a press release. Jasper has
Mm.
great templates for press releases. Everything's templated. Everything's templated. And if it's out on public domain, folks, it's templated. If somebody uses your template, view it as a compliment. Don't get all mad at them because if you have it out there in the public and somebody says, "Ooh, I like the way that's set up. I'm going to do that." That's what it is. It's just what it is. Um, but yeah, so we always close out a show with a quote, and I think quotes really give a lot of insight as to the individual. And it's also something that it's okay to borrow a quote when you need a quote, right? It's okay to shore up. Sometimes that's what lipstick is for too. The days that you're not feeling 100%, throw on a coat of lipstick or put on your favorite sweater or whatever you need in order to build up your armory in order to be able to get through that next layer, that next level, right? So what is your quote?
I think you have it word for word, but I love this quote by Theodore Roosevelt that about the man in the arena, or as we say, the woman in the arena. Kim, what were the actual words I gave you?
Oh, the actual words. Okay,
Yeah.
folks, again, intake forms. If you are doing a podcast, intake forms are fabulous. Put the things on there that you want, a quote that you live by, and why. The credit belongs to the woman who is actually in the arena. And
Yes.
why is that important to you?
Oh my gosh, because I think so many times, and especially women, I think that's fair to say. We let so many of our fears and doubts and insecurities stop us from doing the thing that we want to do. And that's not just even in business, but just in anything in life. And I think we just have to remember that if not for, and that's why I love like the topic of your like all about resiliency. Like, if not for these things that happen, that it's going to like knock us on our butts and send us into the corner, not wanting to face the world. Like, if not for those moments, then we will never learn, get stronger, and get closer to what it is that we were meant to do. And so we need to be putting ourselves in the arena time and time again. Every time we get knocked on our butts, we need to get back up and put ourselves back in the arena, not let our fears stop us. And I know that I live by that, or I try to live by that every single day. There are times when I don't want to. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to hide for today. But I remind myself, like, no, I need to get out there. I need to put myself out there, because if not for that, then the thing that I ultimately want will not happen. So yeah, that's why I really love that quote.
Well, and thank goodness toddlers are always resilient, because every time they get knocked on their butt, they get back up. And
Yeah.
maybe we should take a cue from the little ones around us and just keep jumping back up. Be that, there was a Weebles. You're too young. Do you remember Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down?
No,
Do you remember those? There was
no.
these little egg-shaped toys from the 80s. And there
Right.
were people, and they had little horses, and they had farms and cities. So they were kind of like a fat Lego. And you could tip them, and they would wobble, but they would never like lie down, right? They would come back up. So they were Weebles wobble. So be a Weeble, folks. Be a Weeble. You know what, Deirdre? Thank you so much for sharing your time. I am super excited to watch your journey and all that you can inspire. Ladies, do look up, do listen to her podcast. It really is very, very good. And you don't get to the Olympics, you don't climb a mountain, you don't do any of those things without a coach, without a guide, without somebody showing you the way. And, Deirdre has made it so simple to follow along. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a blast. I had such a good time. Thank you.
Excellent. All right, ladies, if you ever feel that your resiliency is lagging at any point in time, listen and lean into our resilient community, and you can get your free access, all free, never going to be a sneaky renewal fee or anything like that. Just go to resilientgift.com. resilientgift.com, and you'll get our bi-monthly magazine. You'll get notice of when these podcasts are coming. And hey, if you've got a great story for me, let me know. I'd love to have you on the show. Until next time, I'm Kim Hayden, your host here at Kim Talks Resilience. Thank you for joining us here today at Kim Talks Resilience. I'm your host, Kim Hayden, and I'd love to invite you to our resilient community at resilientgift.com. That's resilientgift.com, and we'll send you our magazine and tickets for upcoming events and all sorts of cool things we do here. So be sure to keep watching. And you know what? Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share, because we all know that sharing is caring.